Mike Harrison was checking reports of strange noises from an abandoned property on the outskirts of Oak Ridge, Maine, his flashlight cutting through the darkness as he approached the weathered door leading to the basement. When he finally forced the rusted lock open, the stench hit him like a physical blow. Ammonia, feces, and something worse, something primal that spoke of suffering beyond words. 6 months later, the German Shepherd who barely survived that basement would do something that would make Mike question everything he thought he knew about healing, trauma, and the unbreakable bond between man and animal. What the dog did when they finally brought him back to the abandoned house made Mike's blood run cold, revealing a truth far more horrifying than anything he could have imagined. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Oak Ridge, Maine wasn't the kind of place where secrets stayed buried for long. With just over 6,000 residents, it was the sort of town where cashiers knew your preferred brand of coffee and the postman asked about your daughter's dance recital. The kind of place where abandoned properties like the old Dawson place on Pinewood Road stood out like a wound that wouldn't heal. Mike Harrison had moved to Oak Ridge 3 years earlier, seeking the opposite of what he'd known during his 12 years of military service: peace, quiet, and stability for his daughter Amanda. At 38, the lines around Mike's eyes had deepened beyond his years, carved there by the weight of responsibilities shouldered alone since his wife's death from cancer 5 years ago. His broad shoulders carried not just the physical strength from years of military training, but the invisible burdens of grief and single parenthood. By day, Mike worked as a construction foreman, but his passion lay in his volunteer work at the Second Chance Animal Shelter, where he'd earned a reputation for his patience with their most challenging cases. There was something in the wounded eyes of abused animals that spoke to the wounded places in him. Sarah Collins had been the town's leading veterinarian for over a decade. At 42, her auburn hair was usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, her green eyes sharp with intelligence and compassion in equal measure. She'd dedicated her practice to the cases others might consider hopeless, earning respect that extended well beyond Oak Ridge's borders. Mike's 8-year-old daughter Amanda was a quiet child, her mother's honey-blonde hair framing a face that smiled too rarely since cancer took Jessica Harrison. She spoke more with her drawings than with words, filling sketchbooks with images of animals and the mother she was forgetting a little more each year. None of them were prepared for what they found in the basement of the Dawson property, a German Shepherd so emaciated that every rib stood out against its dull coat. Patches of skin showed through where fur had fallen out, scabbed and infected. The dog cowered in the corner, pressed against the wall as if trying to disappear into it. Yet there was something in those amber eyes, not aggression, not hatred, just a profound sadness that seemed almost human in its depth. The basement air was thick with the stench of neglect, a nauseating mixture of feces, urine, and decay that made Mike pull his shirt collar over his nose. The beam of his flashlight revealed a concrete floor stained dark in places, walls scratched with desperate claw marks that told a story of attempted escape. In the farthest corner, where shadows gathered like mourners, sat the German Shepherd. "Hey there," Mike said softly, crouching down 15 feet away, making himself smaller. "It's okay now. You're safe." The dog didn't growl or bare its teeth as Mike might have expected. Instead, it watched him with eyes that reflected golden in the flashlight beam, eyes too intelligent, too aware for Mike's comfort. This wasn't the vacant stare of an animal that had given up. This was the gaze of someone who understood exactly what had happened to them. Mike had seen neglect before, had rescued dogs from fighting rings, from hoarders, from situations that made him question his faith in humanity. But something about this dog's quiet dignity broke his heart in a new way. The animal's rib cage was so pronounced it resembled a xylophone, each bone visible beneath the patchy fur. Open sores dotted its body, especially along the back, haunches, and legs where the concrete floor had worn away both fur and skin. Flakes of dried skin scattered the floor around it like macabre confetti. I'm going to help you, Mike promised, his voice cracking. But I need to come closer, okay? He inched forward, movement slow and telegraphed. The dog pressed itself further into the corner, trembling visibly now, but made no move to snap or flee. When Mike was close enough to touch, he extended his hand, palm up offering, not demanding. "Officer Miller's coming with the transport," called a voice from upstairs. "How bad is it?" "Bad," Mike replied, not taking his eyes off the dog. "Really bad." Dr. Sarah Collins arrived 20 minutes later, her emergency kit in hand. Her sharp intake of breath as she entered the basement told Mike everything. "How is he still alive?" she whispered, kneeling beside Mike, who hadn't moved from his position near the dog. "Stubbornness, maybe," Mike said. "Or hope." Sarah's examination was gentle but thorough. Male, probably around 2 years old based on his teeth. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, multiple skin infections, bacterial and fungal. Some of these wounds are infected. He's running a fever. She looked at Mike, her expression grave. "He needs immediate medical attention. Mike, this isn't a shelter case. He needs hospitalization." The process of moving the dog was heart-wrenching, though he made no attempt to bite. His terror was palpable as they carefully lifted him onto a blanket that served as a makeshift stretcher. He was lighter than he should have been, catastrophically so, and Mike felt each rib and vertebra beneath his hands as they carried him up the basement stairs and into the animal control van. Back at Sarah's clinic, the full extent of the dog's condition became clear under the bright examination lights. Blood tests revealed anemia and signs of organ stress. X-rays showed old fractures that had healed improperly. The scale confirmed what their eyes told them at 43 pounds. He was barely half the weight a male German Shepherd should be. "Deliberate starvation," Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled anger as she administered IV fluids. "This wasn't neglect, Mike. This was torture." Officer James Miller from Animal Control documented everything with grim efficiency. "We'll find whoever did this," he promised, photographing each wound, each sign of abuse. "Property's been abandoned for months, according to neighbors, but we'll track down the previous owners." Mike stood by, watching Sarah work, feeling simultaneously helpless and determined. When she finished the initial treatment and stepped away to talk with Officer Miller, Mike approached the sedated dog on the examination table. "He'll need somewhere to recover after he's stabilized," Sarah said, returning to Mike's side. "The shelter's at capacity, and a case this severe needs specialized care." Mike knew what she was asking before she said it. He thought about his small house, about Amanda, who was still struggling with losing her mother, about the extra hours he'd need to work to cover additional expenses. "I'll take him," he said, surprising himself with how certain he felt. "I've got experience with rescue cases. I can manage." Sarah studied him for a long moment. "It won't be easy, Mike. His physical recovery will take months. The psychological trauma—" She trailed off. "We don't know what he's been through or how it's affected him." "I know," Mike said, gently placing his hand near the dog's muzzle, not quite touching. "But everyone deserves a second chance." 2 weeks after rescuing the German Shepherd, Mike sat across from Sarah in her clinic office, the weight of her words settling over him like a shroud. "The next 30 days are critical," Sarah said, sliding a folder of medical charts across her desk. "If he doesn't begin to show significant improvement both physically and behaviorally, we may need to consider humane euthanasia." Mike flinched at the word. "He's getting stronger every day. The antibiotics are clearing up the skin infections, and he's gained almost 4 pounds. Physically, yes, there's improvement," Sarah acknowledged, her tone gentle but firm. "But Mike, you know as well as I do that the psychological damage is profound. He's still not eating consistently. He's showing extreme fear responses. He hasn't bonded with you despite your best efforts." Mike ran a hand through his hair, the sleepless nights of the past 2 weeks evident in the dark circles under his eyes. The dog still unnamed. As if Mike feared naming him would make the potential loss more real, spent most of his time hiding in the corner of Mike's spare bedroom, emerging only when the house was completely quiet. "Give him more time," Mike insisted. "He's been through hell." Sarah's expression softened. "I know you've connected with him, Mike. But sometimes the kindest thing we can do is recognize when an animal's quality of life may never recover." The drive home from the clinic felt longer than usual, Mike's thoughts churning with Sarah's warning. He'd fostered dozens of animals over the years, but none had gotten under his skin like this silent, haunted shepherd. He arrived home to find Mrs. Peterson, his elderly neighbor who watched Amanda after school, sitting at the kitchen table with a strange expression. "Everything okay?" Mike asked, immediately alert. "You need to see this," she said, nodding toward the living room. Mike moved quietly to the doorway and froze at the sight before him. Amanda sat cross-legged on the floor, reading aloud from her science textbook, and beside her, not touching, but closer than he'd been to any human since his rescue, lay the German shepherd, his amber eyes fixed on Amanda's face. "He came out about an hour ago," Mrs. Peterson whispered behind him. "She didn't call him or try to pet him. He just chose to be near her." When Amanda reached the end of the chapter, she slowly extended her hand, a small piece of chicken in her palm. Mike held his breath, expecting the dog to retreat as he had every other time food was offered directly. Instead, after a long hesitation, the shepherd delicately took the morsel from Amanda's hand, his tail giving the faintest twitch. It was a breakthrough that gave Mike renewed hope, one that he clung to the next morning when Officer Miller called with news. "We've identified the previous owner," Miller said without preamble. "Property belonged to Robert Dawson, former military, worked as a canine handler in Afghanistan, moved away about 8 months ago, according to neighbors." Mike felt a chill. "Military canine handler. Are you saying this dog might be possibly a washout from the program? Or maybe his personal dog?" "We're still investigating. But here's where it gets complicated. His brother Tom Dawson just contacted us. Says the dog belongs to the family and they want him back." That evening, unable to sleep, Mike found himself scrolling through online records of military canine units. The photo nearly made him drop his phone, a younger, healthier version of his shepherd in a formal military portrait, standing proudly beside a handler whose face was partially obscured. The caption read, "Valor, Military Working Dog, Afghanistan 2022. "Valor," Mike whispered, testing the name. Something about it felt right. The next day, a formal letter arrived from the county animal control office, requesting Mike bring the dog in for assessment. The clinical language barely disguised the underlying message. Specialized facilities might be better equipped to handle a former military working dog with severe trauma. Mike found Sarah waiting in her clinic parking lot after hours, her face troubled. "You heard?" he asked. She nodded. "Tom Dawson has connections with the county board. He's pushing hard, claiming his brother had some kind of breakdown and the family wants to make things right." By making things right, do they mean covering up what Robert did? Mike's voice hardened. "You saw his condition, Sarah. No one who cared about that dog would let him get that way." "I know," Sarah said quietly. "But legally, if they can prove ownership..." Mike slammed his hand against the steering wheel. "Ownership. He's not a lawnmower. He's a living being who was tortured. And now that he's finally starting to trust Amanda, they want to take him away. Back home." Mike found Amanda sitting beside Valor's bed in the corner of the spare room, not touching him but speaking in a low voice. "He was scared of the dark at first," she told Mike without looking up. Like me after Mom died. But I told him it's okay to be scared sometimes. Mike's throat tightened. Sweetheart, there's something we need to talk about. The dog, his name might be Valor. He might have belonged to someone else before. Amanda's face went still in that way that reminded Mike so painfully of Jessica. He belongs with us now, she said with quiet certainty. Some people might disagree, Mike said carefully. They might try to take him away. Would you let them? Her eyes, so like her mother's, bored into him. He thought about the legal battle ahead, about Tom Dawson's connections, about the specialist who had suggested a former military dog with severe trauma might be beyond rehabilitation in a family setting. No, Mike said firmly. I won't let them take him without a fight. That night, as he filed an emergency petition for temporary custody, Mike made a decision that went against every recommendation he'd received. Tomorrow, he would begin treating Valor not as a victim, but as the highly trained military dog he once was. Somewhere beneath the trauma and fear, that dog still existed, and Mike was determined to help him find his way back. The name Shadow came from Amanda. Mike had tried calling the dog Valor, but the German Shepherd showed no recognition, sometimes even flinching at the sound. One evening, as the last of the sunlight stretched across the living room floor, Amanda pointed to the dog's habit of staying just within sight, but always behind her. He follows me like my shadow, she said simply. When she called him Shadow, the dog's ears twitched forward for the first time. Shadow's physical transformation began to accelerate in the third week. The antibiotics and medicated baths were healing his skin, patches of healthy fur starting to grow in the bare spots. His weight, now at 52 pounds, was still dangerously low but improving steadily. Sarah had shown Mike how to prepare a special high-calorie diet, and Shadow had begun accepting food from both Mike and Amanda, though he still retreated to eat in private. His blood work looks much better, Sarah said during their weekly checkup, her voice cautiously optimistic. The anemia is resolving, and his organ function is normalizing. Physically, he's making remarkable progress. The unspoken "but" hung in the air between them. Shadow's mental wounds were proving far more stubborn than his physical ones. Certain triggers would send him into a state of rigid fear, the sound of Mike's work boots on the hardwood floors. Men wearing uniforms of any kind, raised voices, or sudden movements. During these episodes, Shadow would freeze, his muscles so tense that they trembled. Pupils dilated until his eyes looked black instead of amber. Mike began keeping a detailed journal of Shadow's reactions, looking for patterns that might help him understand what had happened in Robert Dawson's home. He'd worked with traumatized animals before, but Shadow's responses suggested specific, targeted abuse rather than general neglect. One morning, Mike tried a simple experiment. He placed his old military duffel on the floor while Shadow watched from across the room. The dog's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking, trembling violently. He tried to squeeze himself under the couch, claws scrabbling desperately against the wooden floor. "Jesus," Mike whispered, quickly removing the bag. "What did that bastard do to you?" Later that week, Officer Miller called with updates that began to fill in the puzzle pieces. Robert Dawson was discharged from the Army 18 months ago. Miller explained, "Honorable discharge, but his separation paperwork mentions PTSD and adjustment issues. His K-9 partner was retired around the same time, a German Shepherd named Valor." "That's him," Mike confirmed. "That's Shadow." "There's more," Miller continued, his voice somber. Dawson's ex-wife filed multiple domestic violence reports before leaving him 10 months ago. Neighbors reported hearing arguments, things breaking. She fled the state. No forwarding address. Mike's stomach tightened. And Valor's Shadow witnessed it all. Possibly worse than witnessed. In one police report, She claimed the dog tried to intervene when Dawson attacked her, and that Dawson threatened to put the dog down for turning on him. The pieces clicked together in Mike's mind. Shadow's terror of men in uniform, of raised voices, of boots on hardwood. The dog hadn't just been abused, he'd been punished for trying to protect someone. That evening, as Mike sat on the porch watching Amanda and Shadow in the yard, the girl drawing in her sketchbook, the dog lying a careful 5 feet away, a black SUV pulled into his driveway. A tall man in an expensive suit emerged, his features sharing enough similarities with the military photo of Robert Dawson to confirm his identity before he even introduced himself. "Tom Dawson," he said, extending his hand. "I believe you have my brother's dog." Mike didn't take the offered hand. "Your brother nearly killed him. He's not going back." Tom's practiced smile didn't reach his eyes. "Look, I understand you're attached, but this is a family matter. My brother is getting treatment at a VA facility, and when he's released, having his service dog back will be critical to his recovery." "Service dog?" Mike couldn't keep the incredulity from his voice. "That dog was starved, beaten, and locked in a basement for months. Your brother should be facing animal cruelty charges, not getting his victim returned to him." Tom's facade of friendliness slipped. "That dog is valuable property, Mr. Harrison. He cost the military over $30,000 to train. My brother's mental health issues don't erase his legal ownership." "Shadow is recovering with my family," Mike said firmly. "The court granted me temporary custody pending the investigation, and I intend to file for permanent adoption." "Shadow," Tom scoffed. "His name is Valor, and he belongs with his handler. My lawyers will be in touch." He turned to leave, then paused. "By the way, I know all about your military record and about the prescription you still take for your own PTSD. I wonder if the court would consider you any more stable than my brother." After Tom left, Mike sat heavily on the porch steps, his hands shaking slightly. The threat was clear this would get ugly, and Tom Dawson had resources and connections that Mike couldn't match. Inside, he found Amanda sitting on the floor of the spare bedroom that had become Shadow's safe space. The dog lay closer to her than Mike had ever seen, his head almost touching her knee. "Dad," Amanda said quietly, "Shadow's afraid again. The man in the black car scared him." Mike looked at the German shepherd, noticing the subtle signs of distress, the slightly elevated breathing, the tension in his muscles. Shadow had recognized Tom Dawson, or at least sensed the connection to his abuser. "It's okay, buddy," Mike said softly. "No one's taking you anywhere." That night, Mike awoke to Amanda's scream. He found her sitting upright in bed, tears streaming down her face. "They took Shadow away," she sobbed. "The men in suits came and took him, and he was crying. Dad, he was crying for us." Mike gathered his daughter into his arms. "It was just a nightmare, sweetheart. Shadow's still here, safe and sound." But as he rocked Amanda back to sleep, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that her nightmare might become reality if Tom Dawson had his way. The next morning, Sarah arrived unannounced, a thick folder under her arm and determination in her eyes. "I've been doing some research," she said, spreading documents across Mike's kitchen table. "Military working dogs have special status. After they're retired, there are specific protocols for their rehoming. If Robert Dawson abused Valor Shadow, then he violated those protocols." Mike scanned the papers. "You think this could help us keep him?" "It's a start," Sarah said. "I've also documented all his medical conditions with photo evidence from the day you found him. No judge who sees these will send him back to anyone connected with his abuse." As they discussed strategy, they heard a soft whine from the doorway. Shadow stood there, watching them intently, his posture unusually alert. "That's new," Sarah observed. He's never voluntarily entered a room with both of us in it before. Carefully, moving with deliberate slowness, Mike reached into the treat jar on the counter and held out a small dog biscuit. Shadow hesitated, then approached not with the fearful cringing they'd grown accustomed to, but with the measured caution of an animal making a conscious choice. He took the treat from Mike's hand, his teeth gentle against Mike's fingers. Instead of retreating to eat it, he remained, his amber eyes moving between Mike and Sarah as if assessing something. "Good boy," Mike whispered, feeling a lump form in his throat. It was such a small gesture, but it represented an enormous leap of faith from an animal who had every reason never to trust humans again. Later that day, Mike received a call from a journalist at the Oak Ridge Gazette who'd heard about Shadow's case from someone at the courthouse. Initially hesitant, Mike realized the potential value of public support and agreed to an interview, with conditions: no photographs of Shadow without Sarah's approval, no details about Amanda, and focus on the broader issues of animal welfare rather than just their specific case. The story ran the following week, alongside Sarah's carefully selected before and after photos. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Offers of support poured in: donations for Shadow's medical care, letters of solidarity, even volunteer legal assistance from a retired judge who specialized in animal welfare cases. Tom Dawson's response was equally swift. A cease and desist letter arrived by courier, demanding retraction of defamatory statements about Robert Dawson and threatening additional legal action. The letter referred to Shadow exclusively as the military asset designated Valor and claimed that his condition had been exaggerated for media sympathy. "They're scared," said Eleanor Wright, the retired judge who had offered her services pro bono. "The publicity makes it harder for them to quietly reclaim Shadow through legal maneuvering." 5 weeks after his rescue, Shadow reached 2 significant milestones on the same day. He broke the 60-pound mark on Sarah's scale, and for the first time, he approached Mike unprompted, pressing his muzzle briefly against Mike's hand before retreating. That evening, as Amanda sat doing homework at the kitchen table, Shadow lying in what had become his spot nearby, Mike received a text message that made his blood run cold. It was from Sarah, who had been reviewing Shadow's latest test results, found something disturbing in blood work. Previous exposure to sedatives commonly used in animal fighting rings. "Call me." Before Mike could process this new information, he heard a car door slam outside. Through the window, he saw Tom Dawson walking purposefully toward his front door, accompanied by a uniformed police officer and another man in a suit. "Amanda," Mike said calmly, though his heart was racing. "Take Shadow to the back bedroom and stay there until I come get you." As Amanda led Shadow away, Mike opened the door to face whatever was coming next. The battle for Shadow was about to enter a new phase, one that would reveal how deep the Dawson family's secrets truly went. "Mr. Harrison," the police officer said, his expression professionally neutral. "I'm Officer Daniels. We have some questions regarding the German Shepherd you've been keeping." Mike blocked the doorway with his body, keenly aware of Tom Dawson's smug expression. "I have temporary custody through animal control. All my paperwork is in order." The man in the suit stepped forward. "I'm Lawrence Reed, attorney representing the Dawson family. We have reason to believe you've been interfering with military property. The dog, designation Valor, was never officially retired from service and remains under contract to the Department of Defense." "That's not true," Mike said, his voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. "I have confirmation from Officer Miller that Valor, who I call Shadow, was officially retired when Robert Dawson was discharged." "May we come in?" Officer Daniels asked. "This would be better discussed inside." Mike reluctantly stepped aside, his mind racing. He'd anticipated legal challenges, but not this level of coordination. He gestured toward the living room, deliberately steering them away from the hallway leading to the bedrooms where Amanda and Shadow were hiding. "We have documentation," Reed continued, sliding papers across the coffee table, "showing that despite physical retirement, the dog remains registered as government property under Extended Handler Care Protocol." Mike scanned the documents, immediately spotting irregularities. The dates didn't align with what Officer Miller had told him, and several signatures looked hastily added. "These look backdated," Mike observed, "and they contradict the retirement papers filed with the VA." Tom Dawson's jaw tightened. "My brother is a decorated veteran who deserves respect, not accusations. The dog was assigned to him personally." "The dog was abused and abandoned," Mike countered. "Left to starve in a locked basement for months. I have medical documentation, photographs, and testimony from the veterinarian who saved his life." Officer Daniels, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Mr. Harrison, regardless of the circumstances, if the animal is legally owned by either Mr. Dawson or the government, you would be required to surrender him pending investigation." A car door slammed outside, and moments later, Sarah Collins burst through the front door without knocking, a folder clutched in her hand, and Officer James Miller behind her. "I received your text about visitors," she said to Mike, her composure barely masking her anger. She turned to Officer Daniels. "I'm Dr. Sarah Collins, the veterinarian treating this case. Before anything proceeds, you need to see this." She spread photos across the table, graphic, clinical images documenting Shadow's condition on the day of his rescue. The emaciated body, the infected wounds, the patches of missing fur. "This dog weighed 43 pounds when found," Sarah stated, her professional tone in stark contrast to the horrific images. "A healthy male German Shepherd of his age should weigh approximately 85 pounds. He had multiple infections, evidence of blunt force trauma, and indicators of prolonged isolation." Officer Miller stepped forward. "I've been investigating this case from the beginning. The documentation Mr. Reed is presenting contradicts official records I've obtained directly from military channels." He produced his own folder. "These are the authentic retirement papers for military working dog Valor, officially released from service and transferred to civilian status 18 months ago." Reed's confident demeanor faltered. "My client has provided—" "Your client," Miller interrupted, "has created fraudulent documents to obscure the fact that his brother committed aggravated animal cruelty, which is a felony in this state." The confrontation was interrupted by a crash from the back of the house, followed by Amanda's frightened cry. Mike bolted down the hallway, the others close behind him. He found the bedroom window shattered, glass scattered across the floor, and Amanda standing frozen in the center of the room. Shadow was nowhere to be seen. "He jumped through the window," Amanda sobbed. "A man was looking in, and Shadow he crashed right through the glass." Mike's heart hammered in his chest as he rushed to the broken window. In the backyard below, he could see blood on the grass and scattered shards of glass, but no sign of Shadow or the intruder. "Someone deliberately spooked him," Mike said, turning to Officer Daniels. "This was coordinated. They knew exactly when to strike." Officer Daniels' professional detachment vanished, replaced by genuine concern. "Officer Miller, call for backup. We need to establish a perimeter." To Mike, he added, "Do you have any recent photos of the dog? Anything that shows his current condition?" As Sarah comforted Amanda, Mike, Miller, and Daniels organized a search. Tom Dawson and his attorney had conveniently disappeared during the chaos, their SUV no longer in the driveway. "They planned this," Mike said grimly as he grabbed Shadow's leash and a bag of treats. "They knew they were losing the legal argument, so they took him by force." Within an hour, half of Oak Ridge seemed mobilized in the search for Shadow. Neighbors, shelter volunteers, and even strangers who had read about Shadow's case joined the effort. combing the woods behind Mike's property and the surrounding streets. As darkness fell, the search parties used flashlights, calling Shadow's name into the deepening gloom. Mike's phone rang just as he was checking a drainage ditch at the edge of the neighborhood. "Mike, it's Sarah. You need to get back to your house. Now." Something in her voice sent a chill through him. "What's happened? Is Amanda okay?" "She's fine. She's with me. But we just got a call from the police. They've found Robert Dawson's car abandoned at the old property where you found Shadow. They think he might have taken him back there." Mike raced back to his house, finding Sarah and Amanda waiting with Officer Miller. "We haven't approached the building yet," Miller explained. "We don't know if Dawson is armed, and we need to be careful about spooking the dog further. He's injured from going through that window." "I'm coming with you," Mike insisted. "No way," Miller began, but Sarah interrupted. "He's right. James, Shadow knows Mike. He's terrified and injured he might attack anyone else who approaches." Miller reluctantly agreed, issuing Mike a bulletproof vest and clear instructions: stay behind the officers, follow commands immediately, and do not approach until given clearance. The old Dawson property was eerily silent as they arrived, emergency lights casting red and blue shadows across the overgrown yard. Robert's car, a battered sedan, sat empty in the driveway, its driver's door hanging open. "Blood on the seat," observed one of the officers quietly. "Not a lot, but recent." They approached the house cautiously, officers with flashlights checking each window before moving to the front door. It hung partially open, swaying slightly in the evening breeze. "Robert Dawson," called a senior officer through a bullhorn. "This is the police. Come out with your hands visible." Silence answered them. After clearing the main floor and finding nothing, the team approached the basement door, the same door Mike had opened 6 months earlier to find Shadow. From behind it came a low, continuous growl. "Shadow," Mike called softly. "It's me, buddy. It's Mike." The growling stopped, replaced by a whimper. "Mr. Harrison," the lead officer said quietly. "We need to go in first to secure the scene." Mike nodded, stepping back as 2 officers carefully descended the basement stairs, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Moments later, one called up, "You need to see this, sir. Both of you." Mike followed the officers down into the basement, the smell immediately bringing back memories of that first day. The flashlight beams revealed Robert Dawson sitting on the floor in the same corner where Shadow had been found, his back against the wall. The German shepherd stood between Robert and the stairs, his posture rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Blood matted the fur on Shadow's shoulder and side, presumably from the window glass. "He won't let us near," one officer explained. "He's not attacking, but he's not backing down either." Robert looked up, his face gaunt and his eyes unfocused. "He came back," he said, his voice slurred. "Valor came home." Mike approached slowly, speaking softly. "Shadow, it's okay. You're safe now." The dog's ears flicked toward Mike's voice, but he maintained his position between the officers and Robert. "He's protecting him," Sarah whispered in disbelief. "After everything. He's still trying to do his job." Robert's gaze cleared slightly. "I didn't deserve him," he said, tears streaming down his face. "He was the best thing I had, and His voice broke. "I punished him for trying to stop me from hurting Karen. He was just doing what he was trained to do, protect people, and I locked him down here for it." "Robert," Mike said carefully, "Shadow needs medical attention. He's bleeding. Please tell him it's okay to come with us." Robert closed his eyes. "Valor," he said clearly, using the command voice that the dog would recognize from their military days. "Release." Shadow's posture changed immediately. the tension flowing out of his body. He took 2 steps away from Robert, then looked back, conflicted. "It's okay," Robert said, gentler now. "Go with them. They'll take care of you." Shadow hesitated, then limped toward Mike, pressing against his leg. When the officers moved to apprehend Robert, the dog whined but stayed with Mike, his training and new trust battling with years of ingrained loyalty. Outside, as paramedics examined Robert before taking him into custody, Sarah knelt beside Shadow on the lawn, examining his injuries. "The cuts aren't too deep," she said with relief, "but he's reopened some of his healing skin infections, and he's in shock. We need to get him to the clinic." Mike knelt beside Shadow, gently stroking the uninjured parts of his neck. "You did good, buddy. So good. But you're not on duty anymore. Your job now is just to be a dog, our dog." As if understanding, Shadow leaned heavily against Mike's side and closed his eyes, the vigilant tension finally leaving his body. For the first time since his rescue, he seemed to truly surrender to exhaustion, trusting Mike to keep watch while he rested. Later, as Sarah treated Shadow's injuries at her clinic, Officer Miller pulled Mike aside. "Robert Dawson made a full confession," he said quietly, "but there's something else you should know. He says there was another dog, a puppy. Shadow's trainee, of sorts. He claims he gave it away. But—" Mike felt his stomach clench. "You think it might still be in that house somewhere, hidden like Shadow was?" Miller nodded grimly. "We're going back with cadaver dogs tomorrow, but given how well Shadow survived, there's a chance." Mike looked over at Shadow, sedated on the examination table as Sarah carefully removed glass fragments from his wounds. "If there's another dog," he said, determination hardening his voice, "we'll find it, and this time we'll be ready." The fluorescent lights of the county jail's visitor room cast harsh shadows across Robert Dawson's face. Once a strong, capable soldier, he now looked hollowed out, his military bearing replaced by the slumped posture of a defeated man. Across the table, Mike studied the person responsible for Shadow's suffering, searching for some glimmer of the monster he had imagined. Instead, he saw only a broken human being, eyes vacant and hands trembling, slightly evidence of the withdrawal from self-medication that had begun during his first 48 hours in custody. "The other dog," Mike said without preamble. "The search team didn't find anything at your house." Robert's eyes, bloodshot and unfocused, briefly met Mike's before sliding away. "I told them everything. There was a puppy, a washout from the program too gentle for military work. I called her Scout." "Where is she now?" "I don't know." Robert's voice cracked. "I gave her to Tom before things got bad. She was only 4 months old. Valor Shadow, he was teaching her. You know, like a mentor." Mike leaned forward. "Your brother denied knowing anything about a second dog." A bitter laugh escaped Robert's lips. "Of course he did. Tom's all about appearances. Perfect job, perfect house, perfect family. A screwed-up brother was bad enough. A screwed-up brother with PTSD and a drinking problem. That's why he helped me disappear, not to protect me, but to protect the family name." Outside the jail, Sarah waited in her car, Shadow sedated in a travel crate in the back seat. The glass cuts had required 27 stitches across his shoulder and flank, and the stress had caused a severe relapse of his skin infections. Worse than the physical injuries was the psychological regression. Shadow had withdrawn completely, refusing food and flinching from touch, his hard-won progress erased in a single traumatic night. "How is he?" Mike asked as he slid into the passenger seat. Sarah shook her head. "Not good. He's shut down. Mike, it's like the first day all over again, except now he's in even more pain because he knows what it's like to trust and have that trust broken." On the drive back to Sarah's clinic, Mike relayed what Robert had told him about the missing puppy. If Tom has her, she could be anywhere. He owns property in 3 states according to the record search. Focus on Shadow for now, Sarah advised, her eyes on the road. He needs you more than ever. At the clinic, Sarah had converted a quiet back room into a recovery space for Shadow. Unlike a standard kennel, she'd furnished it with a real bed, soft lighting, and familiar items from Mike's home, Amanda's sweater, Shadow's favorite blanket. But the German shepherd lay motionless in the corner, ignoring the comforts, his body curled tightly as if trying to disappear. "I'd like to try something," Sarah said, leading Mike to her office. "I've consulted with Dr. Ellis from the Veterinary Trauma Center. He suggests we might need to recreate aspects of Shadow's military life, the structure, the purpose to help him reconnect." "You mean treat him like a working dog again, after everything he's been through?" Sarah handed Mike a research paper. "For dogs with his level of training, their identity is deeply connected to their work. Retirement can be traumatic even without abuse. Dr. Ellis believes Shadow may be struggling with conflicting loyalties. His training tells him to serve his handler, but his handler hurt him. He needs to understand he has a new purpose now." Mike spent the rest of the day sitting quietly in Shadow's room, not forcing interaction, but simply being present. Occasionally he would talk softly, telling Shadow about Amanda, about their home, about the future they could have together. That evening, as Mike was preparing to leave, Sarah received a call that changed everything. "It's Officer Miller," she said, handing Mike the phone. "I'm at the courthouse," Miller said without greeting. "Robert Dawson's bail hearing just ended. Tom posted his bond. He's being released within the hour." Mike felt a chill. "I thought the judge denied bail." "Different judge today. Judge Carlton, who happens to be Tom Dawson's former college roommate. The DA's furious, but there's nothing we can do. Robert's being released into Tom's custody, with the understanding that he'll enter a private treatment facility." Mike thanked Miller and hung up, a sense of dread settling over him. "I need to get home to Amanda," he told Sarah. "Can you keep Shadow here overnight? I don't want him anywhere near my place if the Dawsons decide to pay another visit." Sarah agreed. But as Mike turned to leave, a small whimper stopped him. Shadow had crawled halfway across the room, his body trembling with the effort, eyes fixed on Mike with desperate intensity. "He knows something's wrong," Sarah whispered. "His training included threat assessment. He can sense your fear." Mike knelt beside Shadow, gently stroking his head. "It's okay, buddy. I'm just going to check on Amanda. I'll be back tomorrow." But as Mike stood to leave, Shadow struggled to his feet, swaying slightly from the effects of pain medication. Despite his injuries, he positioned himself between Mike and the door. His message clear: "You are not facing this threat alone." Mike arrived home to find Amanda safe with Mrs. Peterson, but his relief was short-lived. His front door stood partially open, the lock cleanly picked. Inside, drawers had been emptied and papers scattered, a clear search for something specific. Officer Miller arrived minutes later, documenting the break-in efficiently. "They're looking for something," he confirmed. "The question is, what?" The answer came at dawn, when Sarah called in a panic. "Someone broke into the clinic," she said, her voice shaking. "They tranquilized my overnight assistant and Mike. They took Shadow's medical records. All of them. The original photographs, the blood work results, everything. They're destroying evidence," Mike realized. "Without your documentation, it's just Robert's word against ours about Shadow's condition." "There's more," Sarah continued, her voice dropping. "They tried to take Shadow too, but Mike, he attacked the intruder, tore through his stitches defending himself. He's bleeding badly, and he won't let anyone near him, not even me." Mike drove to the clinic at breakneck speed, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Inside, he found Sarah sitting on the floor outside the supply closet where Shadow had barricaded himself after the attack. "He's in there," she said, pointing to the partially open door. "Be careful, he's in full defense mode. I've tried everything." Mike approached slowly, dropping to his knees a few feet from the closet door. "Shadow," he called softly. "It's Mike. You're safe now." A low growl answered him. "He's lost too much blood," Sarah whispered from behind. "If we can't treat him soon." Mike closed his eyes, thinking. Then he remembered what Robert had said about the dog's military training. Slowly, he straightened his posture and cleared his throat. "Valor, report," he said firmly, using the command tone he remembered from his own military days. The growling stopped. After a moment's silence, there was a faint scratching sound from inside the closet. "Report," Mike repeated, holding his breath. Slowly, painfully, Shadow emerged from the closet, blood soaking his bandages. Despite his injuries, he dragged himself to Mike's side and sat at attention, awaiting further orders. "Good boy," Mike whispered, his voice breaking. "Stand down now. We've got you." When Sarah approached with a sedative, Shadow's muscles tensed, but he remained in position, trusting Mike's command even through his fear. Once sedated, they rushed him into surgery to repair the torn stitches and treat the new wounds. He tore his stitches because he knew what they were after. Sarah explained later as they watched Shadow's sedated form in the recovery room. "He fought them, Mike. After everything he's been through, he still had the courage to fight." Mike nodded, a lump in his throat. "And now we have nothing to prove what they did to him. No medical records, no evidence." "Not quite nothing," Sarah corrected, pulling a small USB drive from her pocket. "I keep backups of all abuse cases at home. Digital copies of everything, not as good as the originals for court, but still damning. The question is, what do we do with them now?" Mike stared at Shadow's sleeping form, at the fresh bandages and IV lines, visual testament to the dog's continued suffering. Something hardened in his chest, a cold fury replacing his earlier fear. "We go public," he said decisively. "All of it, the abuse, the cover-up, the corruption. If the courts won't protect him because of the Dawsons' connections, we'll let the court of public opinion decide." As if sensing the shift in the room, Shadow whimpered in his sedated sleep, his legs twitching as if running from unseen dangers. "Look at him," Mike said softly. "He's given everything, his service, his loyalty, his health, and they're still hunting him. At what point do we say enough?" Sarah placed her hand over Mike's. "The hearing for permanent custody is in 3 days. If Shadow survives until then—" "If," Mike repeated, the word bitter in his mouth. "After everything, it still comes down to if." The courtroom buzzed with low conversation as Mike took his seat beside Eleanor Wright, the retired judge who had volunteered to represent Shadow's interests. The local media presence had swelled beyond anything Oak Ridge had seen in years, not just the Gazette, but regional television stations and even a national cable news crew, drawn by the story Sarah had carefully leaked to sympathetic journalists. "Remember," Eleanor whispered, arranging her notes on the table, "Judge Peterson has a reputation for impartiality, but he's also known for strict adherence to property law. The Dawsons will frame this as a simple ownership dispute." Mike nodded tightly, his eyes fixed on the opposite table where Tom Dawson sat in an impeccable suit, flanked by not one but 3 attorneys. Robert was conspicuously absent. "Where's Robert?" Mike asked. "I thought he was released into Tom's custody." "Conveniently checked into a private rehabilitation facility yesterday," Eleanor replied. "Unavailable to testify." The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Peterson entered a stern-faced man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for running a tight courtroom. This is a hearing to determine the disposition of the animal identified alternately as Valor and Shadow, the judge began, peering at the papers before him. I understand there's significant public interest in this case, but I'll remind everyone that this court operates according to law, not sentiment. Mr. Reed, you may present your client's position. Lawrence Reed rose smoothly. Your Honor, this is fundamentally a simple matter of property law. The German Shepherd in question is legally owned by Robert Dawson, who acquired him legitimately upon the animal's retirement from military service. Mr. Harrison, despite his well-meaning intentions, essentially took possession of another person's property without going through proper channels. And where is Robert Dawson today? The judge inquired. He's currently receiving treatment for service-related PTSD. Your Honor, my client, Thomas Dawson, is acting on his brother's behalf as family. Judge Peterson made a note. And what is your position regarding the allegations of neglect and abuse? Reed's expression never faltered. Your Honor, while the animal was admittedly in poor condition when found, we maintain this was the result of Robert Dawson's mental health crisis, not deliberate cruelty. The family acknowledges the animal needs care but intends to place him in a specialized facility for retired military working dogs, not return him to Robert's personal custody. Eleanor rose next, her small stature belying her commanding presence. Your Honor, if I may, this case extends far beyond simple property law. We have extensive evidence that the dog was subjected to prolonged, deliberate cruelty that nearly resulted in his death. Furthermore, we have reason to believe Mr. Thomas Dawson was aware of the situation and failed to intervene. She proceeded to outline the evidence, Sarah's medical reports, photographs, and testimony from Officer Miller. The judge listened impassively, occasionally making notes. Additionally, Eleanor continued, we have filed a separate motion arguing that the unique nature of working animals, particularly those who have served our country, demands consideration beyond property law. Shadow or Valor, if you prefer, is not a car or a piece of furniture, but a living being who has demonstrated remarkable resilience and formed healing bonds with Mr. Harrison's family. The morning proceeded with testimony from Officer Miller about the condition of the basement where Shadow was found, followed by Sarah's detailed medical assessment. She spoke with clinical precision about the starvation, infections, and evidence of physical trauma, her composed demeanor making the horrific details all the more impactful. In my professional opinion, Sarah concluded, returning this dog to anyone associated with his previous trauma would cause irreparable psychological harm. The progress he's made with the Harrison family would be completely undone. During the lunch recess, Mike stepped into the hallway to check on Amanda, who was waiting with Mrs. Peterson in the courthouse cafeteria. Shadow remained at the veterinary clinic, still recovering from his injuries but stabilized. "How's it going, Dad?" Amanda asked, her voice small. "The judge is listening carefully," Mike reassured her, though inwardly he wasn't so confident. Judge Peterson's expression had revealed nothing throughout the morning testimony. When court resumed, Tom Dawson took the stand, portraying himself as a concerned family member trying to make things right. "My brother served this country honorably," he testified with practiced sincerity. "When he returned with PTSD, none of us recognized how serious his condition had become. Had I known the dog was being neglected, I would have intervened immediately. Yet phone records indicate you visited your brother's residence 3 times during the period when the dog was imprisoned in the basement," Eleanor pointed out during cross-examination. "Are we to believe you never noticed?" Tom's expression tightened momentarily. "I checked on my brother, not his pets. The basement door was locked. I had no reason to ask what was behind it." As the afternoon wore on, the legal arguments became increasingly technical, with Tom's attorneys challenging the admissibility of the backup medical records and questioning Sarah's objectivity given her friendship with Mike. Just as the proceedings seemed to be tilting in the Dawsons' favor, the courtroom doors opened. A woman in her early 30s entered hesitantly, her arm in a cast and fading bruises visible on her face. "Your Honor," Eleanor said immediately, "we call Karen Dawson, Robert Dawson's ex-wife, to testify." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Tom Dawson's face drained of color. "Objection." Reed was on his feet. "Ms. Dawson was not on the witness list. This is completely improper." "Your Honor," Eleanor countered, "Ms. Dawson contacted us only this morning after seeing news coverage. Her testimony is directly relevant to the dog's history and the credibility of the Dawson family's claims." After a tense exchange, Judge Peterson allowed Karen to testify, but limited to facts directly pertaining to the dog's treatment. Karen took the stand, her hands trembling slightly. "Valor, that's what we called him, was a hero," she began quietly. "When Robert first brought him home, he was a beautiful, confident dog who helped my husband manage his anxiety. But as Robert's drinking got worse, so did his temper." She described the escalating abuse first directed at her, then at the dog when he tried to intervene. Valor was doing what he was trained to do, protect people from threats. But Robert couldn't stand that his dog would turn against him. That's when he started punishing him, locking him away for longer and longer periods. "Did Thomas Dawson know about this situation?" Eleanor asked. Karen nodded. "Tom came over during one of Robert's episodes. He saw everything, the state of the house, my bruises. Valor locked in the basement. He told me to handle it privately because public attention would damage the family reputation." "And the puppy?" Eleanor prompted. "The second dog, named Scout." Karen's composure finally broke. Scout was Valor's training project. Robert was teaching Valor to mentor younger dogs. When things got bad, Tom took Scout, said he'd find her a good home. But later, Robert told me. She paused, struggling. "He said Tom used her in some kind of betting operation. Dogs fighting for entertainment at private parties. Rich men betting on which untrained dog would show the most natural talent for aggression." The courtroom erupted at this revelation. Judge Peterson hammered his gavel repeatedly, calling for order while Tom Dawson conferred urgently with his attorneys. "Your Honor," Reed protested once quiet was restored, "these are outrageous, unsubstantiated allegations that have nothing to do with the matter before this court." Judge Peterson adjusted his glasses. "I disagree, Counselor. If true, these allegations speak directly to Mr. Thomas Dawson's credibility and fitness to have any role in determining the dog's future." To Karen, he asked, "Do you have any evidence of these dog-fighting activities?" "Just what Robert told me," Karen admitted. "But I believe him. There was money coming in that Tom couldn't explain to his wife, and Scout wasn't the only puppy that disappeared." At that moment, the courtroom doors opened again. Officer Miller entered, accompanied by a stranger in a military uniform. The officer approached Eleanor and whispered urgently in her ear. "Your Honor," Eleanor announced, "the prosecution would like to call an unexpected witness. Master Sergeant David Collins, formerly of the Military Working Dog Training Program." Judge Peterson, clearly frustrated by the irregular proceedings but unwilling to block potentially crucial testimony, reluctantly agreed. Master Sergeant Collins took the stand in full uniform, his bearing unmistakably military. "I was Robert Dawson's commanding officer during his service as a dog handler," he explained. "After learning about this case through news coverage, I contacted the local authorities to provide relevant information about the dog in question." Collins produced a file folder. "This is Valor's complete military service record, including his retirement processing. According to our documentation, Valor was officially retired due to PTSD after a combat incident where both he and Specialist Dawson were injured. The retirement stipulated specific conditions for his care as a former military asset. And what were those conditions? Eleanor asked. Regular veterinary checkups, appropriate housing and nutrition, and most importantly, prohibition against use in any security, protection, or combat capacity. Retired military dogs, especially those with trauma histories, are explicitly forbidden from being used in any form of fighting, guard work, or protection services without specialized oversight. Collins turned to face the judge directly. Your Honor, I've reviewed the medical reports for this animal. The conditions described are consistent with intentional cruelty, not simple neglect. Furthermore, I've been made aware of allegations regarding dogfighting activities. If those allegations are true, they represent not just animal cruelty, but a federal offense when involving a retired military animal. Judge Peterson called a 30-minute recess, during which the courthouse corridors filled with speculative chatter. Mike stood near a window, trying to process the unexpected turns the hearing had taken. You didn't know about any of this, did you? Sarah asked, joining him. Mike shook his head. I suspected the abuse was systematic, but the fighting ring. No wonder Tom was so desperate to get Shadow's medical records. He wasn't just covering for Robert, he was covering his own criminal activities. When court resumed, an unexpected commotion preceded the judge's entrance. 2 uniformed police officers escorted Amanda into the courtroom, a social worker following closely behind. Mike jumped to his feet in alarm. What's happening? He demanded. Amanda is supposed to be with Mrs. Peterson. Your Honor, Officer Miller explained as Judge Peterson took his seat. Miss Harrison insisted on speaking to the court. Given the circumstances, I thought you should decide whether to hear her. Judge Peterson studied Amanda's determined face. Young lady, this is most irregular. Are you aware of the serious nature of these proceedings? Yes, sir, Amanda replied, her voice small but steady. But Shadow saved my life, and nobody knows about it except my dad and me. I need to tell you before you decide. After a moment's consideration, the judge nodded. Approach the bench, please. Amanda walked forward, looking tiny before the imposing bench. Mike moved to join her, but the judge waved him back. Let's hear what she has to say on her own. Mr. Harrison? When Shadow first came to live with us, Amanda began, I was the only one he wasn't afraid of. Dad said it was because I was small and didn't seem threatening. But last week, when the bad men came to our house, Shadow knew they wanted to hurt us. She described, in the simple but vivid language of an 8-year-old, how Shadow had positioned himself between her and the window, growling a warning before the glass shattered. He didn't run away from the man at the window. Your Honor, he crashed through the glass to chase him away from me. Even though he was hurt and scared, he remembered how to be brave. He didn't forget. The courtroom was utterly silent as Amanda finished. Shadow belongs with us because we belong with him. We're his pack now, and if you send him away, it would be like losing my mom all over again. Judge Peterson's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. Thank you, young lady. You may return to your seat. As Amanda rejoined Mike, the judge studied his notes for several long moments. When he looked up, his decision seemed to have crystallized. Given the extraordinary circumstances of this case and the evidence presented today, I am prepared to rule. But first, he turned to Tom Dawson. I want to advise you, Mr. Dawson, that anything you say in this courtroom may be used in subsequent criminal proceedings which now appear likely. Do you wish to modify your testimony in any way? Tom Dawson, his earlier confidence entirely evaporated, conferred briefly with his attorneys. Your Honor, in light of recent developments, we are withdrawing our petition for custody of the animal in question. A ripple of reaction passed through the courtroom, quickly silenced by the judge's stern gaze. "Very well," Judge Peterson said. "In the matter of the German shepherd known as Valor or Shadow, I hereby grant permanent custody to Michael Harrison, with the stipulation that Dr. Sarah Collins provide quarterly reports on the animal's condition for the next year." He paused, then added, "I am also referring the testimony regarding animal fighting and evidence tampering to the District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation. Court is adjourned." As the gavel struck, finalizing Shadow's freedom, Mike felt the weight of months of uncertainty lift from his shoulders. Whatever challenges lay ahead in Shadow's recovery, they would face them together as a family. 3 months after the courthouse hearing, Mike stood in his backyard, morning coffee warming his hands against the autumn chill. Across the lawn, Shadow moved with a fluidity that would have seemed impossible during those first desperate weeks. At 78 pounds, he was still leaner than the ideal weight for his breed, but muscle had replaced the skeletal gauntness, and his coat had grown in thick and glossy, covering most of the scars from his ordeal. Amanda sat cross-legged on the grass nearby, her sketchbook open as she captured Shadow's alert profile. The bond between them had only deepened since the trial, a connection that seemed to transcend words, built on a foundation of mutual protection and trust. "Looking good out there," Sarah called, stepping through the back gate with a bag of medical supplies. Her weekly house calls had become such a natural part of their routine that Shadow now greeted her with a gentle nudge of his nose against her hand, a far cry from the terrified animal who once cowered at the sight of strangers. "He had a good night," Mike replied. "No nightmares that I could tell, and he's eating consistently now." Sarah nodded approvingly as she set her bag down on the patio table. "Let's check those last stitches. They should be ready to come out today." Shadow obediently approached when called, sitting patiently as Sarah examined the healing scar along his flank, the last visible reminder of his desperate leap through the window. As she worked, Mike marveled at how far they had come. The dog, who once trembled at human touch, now leaned slightly into Sarah's gentle hands, amber eyes half closed in contentment. "Perfect healing," Sarah pronounced, removing the final sutures. "I'd say he's officially cleared for normal activity." "Did you hear that, buddy?" Mike scratched behind Shadow's ears. "You're officially off the injured list." The weeks following the trial had not been without challenges. The first night after bringing Shadow home permanently, the dog had paced restlessly until dawn, checking each window and door as if expecting intruders. Loud noises still triggered momentary freezing echoes of trauma that might never completely fade. But each day brought small victories the first time Shadow played with a toy, the morning he voluntarily joined Mike and Amanda for breakfast. The afternoon he dozed in the sun without startling at every sound. "Have you given any thought to what we discussed?" Sarah asked as she packed away her supplies. "About the therapy dog program." Mike nodded. "I'm still not sure he's ready, but I talked with the coordinator yesterday. She thinks Shadow's background might actually make him perfect for working with veterans dealing with PTSD. The irony wasn't lost on any of them that the dog once traumatized by a veteran suffering from post-traumatic stress might now help others with the same condition. The therapy dog program at Oak Ridge Veterans Center was small but growing, and the coordinator had been carefully persistent in her interest in Shadow since hearing his story. "We're going to visit next week," Mike continued, "just to observe, see how he responds to the environment. No pressure either way." Sarah smiled, her hand lingering on Mike's arm a moment longer than strictly necessary. The months of working together to save Shadow had gradually shifted their relationship from professional to personal, though both were taking things slowly, mindful of Amanda's feelings and their own complicated lives. "I think it's worth trying," Sarah said. "He's always been a working dog at heart. Having a purpose might be the final piece of his healing." After Sarah left, Mike called Amanda in for lunch. As they made sandwiches together, he noticed his daughter seemed unusually quiet. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" Amanda arranged her crusts in a neat pattern before answering. "I had the dream again last night. About the other dog." Mike nodded, understanding immediately. Ever since Karen Dawson's testimony about Scout, Amanda had been troubled by thoughts of the puppy's fate. Several times, she'd woken from nightmares, convinced she could hear a dog crying for help. "I know it's hard," Mike said gently. "The police are still investigating, but they haven't found any evidence of where Scout might be." The investigation into Tom Dawson's activities had progressed slowly but steadily. He'd been arrested 2 weeks after the hearing on charges of evidence tampering, initially released on bail pending further investigation into the more serious accusations of organized animal fighting. The Dawson family's carefully constructed facade of respectability had crumbled, revealing financial irregularities and connections to underground gambling that extended well beyond Oak Ridge's borders. "Shadow knows," Amanda said with the simple certainty of childhood. "He gets sad when we talk about Scout. I think he remembers her." Mike had noticed it too, the way Shadow's ears would prick forward at the mention of the puppy's name, followed by a restless, searching behavior that could last for hours. The animal behaviorist they'd consulted suggested it might be coincidence, but Mike wasn't so sure. There seemed to be an intelligence in Shadow's grief, a specific quality to his occasional whining at the back door that felt deliberate rather than random. That afternoon, as summer warmth gave way to autumn crispness, Officer Miller stopped by with news. "They're executing a search warrant on Tom Dawson's hunting cabin up near Lakeside," he explained, accepting the coffee Mike offered. "Financial records show he's been paying utilities on a property that's supposedly been vacant for years." Shadow, who had developed a comfortable rapport with Miller during the investigation, rested his head on the officer's knee, seemingly listening to the conversation. "Any leads on the fighting operation?" Mike asked. Miller shook his head. "Nothing concrete yet. Tom's not talking. And Robert's still in treatment, although his therapist says he's making real progress. He's been asking about Valor Shadow. What does he want?" Mike tensed involuntarily. "Nothing intrusive," Miller assured him. "He's been writing letters as part of his therapy making amends. His therapist thinks it might help his recovery if he could see that Shadow is doing well. Just photos. Nothing in person. It's completely your call. Of course." Mike considered this. His anger toward Robert had mellowed somewhat since Karen's testimony revealed the full extent of his mental health struggles. The man had done terrible things, but he'd also been a casualty of war in his own way, returning damage to a system ill-equipped to help him. "I'll think about it," Mike said finally. "Maybe a photo would give him some peace." After Miller left, Mike found himself dwelling on the news about Tom's hunting cabin. Something about it nagged at him, a connection he couldn't quite make. That evening, as he helped Amanda with her homework, a local news segment caught his attention, something about record rainfall creating flooding concerns near Lakeside. "That's where Officer Miller said they were searching today," Mike murmured, thinking aloud. Shadow, who had been dozing on his bed in the corner, suddenly lifted his head, ears forward and body alert. When the news showed footage of the area around Lakeside, he stood, moving to the television with unusual focus. "Dad," Amanda said quietly, "I think he recognizes that place." The next morning, Mike made a decision. After dropping Amanda at school, he called Sarah. "I need a favor," he said. "Can you go with me to Lakeside?" 2 hours later, they stood at the roadblock where police had sealed off access to Tom Dawson's cabin. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze, and several official vehicles were parked along the narrow dirt road. "I don't know what I expected," Mike admitted. "It just felt important somehow." Sarah squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Shadow was definitely responding to something about this place, Animals have instincts we don't fully understand." They were about to leave when Officer Miller emerged from the tree line, spotting them with surprise. "Mike, what are you doing up here?" Mike explained about Shadow's reaction to the news footage, feeling slightly foolish as he did so. To his surprise, Miller's expression turned serious. "You should come see this," he said, lifting the crime scene tape. "We've been searching since dawn." They followed Miller down a muddy path to the cabin, a deceptively rustic structure that, upon closer inspection, featured high-end security and modern amenities hidden behind its weathered exterior. Behind the cabin, a separate outbuilding stood with reinforced doors and windows covered with heavy mesh. "We found documentation of at least a dozen dogs coming through here," Miller explained grimly. "Some kind of training operation for the fighting ring. The recent flooding washed up some remains down by the creek." Sarah gripped Mike's arm tightly. "And no sign of living animals." Miller shook his head. "Place was cleared out recently, probably when Tom realized we were closing in. But there's something else, something we can't figure out." He led them to a small clearing beyond the outbuilding, where an investigator was photographing what appeared to be freshly disturbed earth. "Someone's been digging here," Miller said. "Not with tools, with hands or paws. We thought maybe it was where they buried dogs that didn't survive the training, but the ground radar shows nothing underneath." Mike stared at the scattered dirt, something tugging at his memory. "Shadow used to dig like this in our yard," he said slowly. "The first few weeks, always in the same spot. Sarah said it might be displacement behavior from stress. Or he was looking for something," Sarah added. "Something buried." A sudden connection formed in Mike's mind. "The basement," he said urgently. "When we found Shadow, there was disturbed earth in one corner. I assumed he'd been trying to dig his way out, but what if, what?" 3 hours later, they stood in the basement of Robert Dawson's abandoned house, now cordoned off as part of the expanding investigation. With proper authorization and equipment this time, they examined the corner where Shadow had been found 6 months earlier. The ground-penetrating radar operator shook his head. Nothing showing up beneath the surface. No remains, no objects large enough to register. Mike felt simultaneously relieved and perplexed. "I was so sure." "Wait," Sarah interrupted, kneeling to examine the concrete more closely. "This section is newer than the rest. See how the color doesn't quite match. The discovery of the false wall within the basement corner took less than an hour with proper tools. Behind it lay a small, crudely constructed hiding space just large enough for a medium-sized dog to shelter in. Empty now. It contained only a worn blanket, some scattered kibble, and a frayed rope toy." "A hiding place," Miller said, surveying the space, "but empty." Mike ran his hand along the rough concrete. Shadow wasn't trying to dig out. He was trying to dig in to check this space. The realization hit them simultaneously. Shadow hadn't been alone in that basement. Scout, the puppy he'd been mentoring, had been hidden in this secret compartment. But where was she now? The next day, with special permission and strict protocols, Mike brought Shadow back to the basement he'd been rescued from. The German Shepherd entered cautiously, his body language alert, but not fearful. When he reached the corner with the now exposed hiding space, he sniffed intently, then looked up at Mike with an expectant whine. "She's not here, buddy," Mike said softly, "but we're looking for her." Shadow circled the area restlessly, then suddenly froze. Nose pointed toward the basement stairwell. A faint sound drifted down so quiet that the humans barely registered it. But Shadow's reaction was immediate and electric. He bounded up the stairs with Mike and the officers close behind. The search that followed took them through the overgrown property, Shadow leading with growing urgency. At the far edge, nearly hidden by vegetation, stood a decrepit shed that had been overlooked in previous searches. Shadow scratched frantically at the padlocked door, vocalizing in a way Mike had never heard before. Not quite a bark, not quite a whine, but something in between that communicated unmistakable purpose. When they broke the lock and pulled the door open, the stench of neglect hit them like a physical force, familiar and horrifying. In the dim light, they could make out a small form huddled in the corner, emaciated and terrified, but alive. Scout no longer a puppy, but a young dog with Shadow's coloring and unmistakable shepherd features had somehow survived. Severely malnourished and covered with infected sores much like Shadow had been, she nonetheless lifted her head at their entrance, amber eyes reflecting the flashlight beams. Shadow approached her with gentle precision, his entire demeanor transformed. Gone was any trace of the traumatized victim. In his place stood a confident protector, nudging Scout gently with his nose and standing guard as Sarah conducted a preliminary examination. "She's in rough shape," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "But she'll survive. Shadow must have been bringing her food before he was locked away himself. That's why he was so thin when we found him. He was sacrificing his own rations." The homecoming that evening was subdued but deeply emotional. Scout, after initial treatment at Sarah's clinic, settled into the spare bedroom that had once been Shadow's recovery space. To everyone's surprise, Shadow refused to leave her side, curling protectively around her smaller form on the bed and cleaning her wounds with gentle attention. "He remembered," Amanda whispered, watching from the doorway. All this time he remembered where she was. The following weeks brought dual healing Scout's physical recovery, mirroring Shadow's own journey months earlier, but accelerated by the constant presence of her guardian and mentor. Shadow seemed transformed by his new purpose, his remaining anxiety channeled into constructive care for the younger dog. When Scout was strong enough, they began taking short walks together in the backyard, Shadow patiently matching his pace to her slower steps. On one such afternoon, as autumn leaves drifted around them in the golden light, Mike watched the two dogs navigate the world together, one leading, one following, both forever changed by what they had endured. "I always wondered why Shadow survived when so many wouldn't have," Sarah said, her hand finding Mike's. "Now I know. He had a reason to hold on." Amanda joined them on the porch steps, her sketchbook open to a drawing of both dogs framed by sunlight. "They're family now," she said simply. "Like us." Mike nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. Through all the darkness, all the struggle, something beautiful had emerged, a family forged not by blood but by choice, by courage, by the simple, powerful act of refusing to abandon hope. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Shadow and Scout returned to the porch. The older dog paused, looking back at the distance they had traveled together, then turned to the humans who had made their new life possible. In his amber eyes shone something that transcended his trauma, a wisdom born of suffering. Yes, but also the unmistakable light of healing. For the first time since his rescue, Shadow rested his head trustingly on Mike's knee without hesitation or fear, finally and truly home. In our twilight years, we recognize a profound truth: the deepest wounds can lead to the most beautiful healings. Shadow's journey reminds us that even when life locks us in dark basements of grief, loss, or loneliness, rescue can arrive unexpectedly. Many of us have weathered our own storms, losing spouses, battling health crises, feeling forgotten by a changing world that moves too quickly. Like Shadow, we may carry scars that will never fully fade. But his story whispers hope to our weathered hearts. It wasn't sophisticated medicine or legal justice that ultimately saved Shadow. It was connection, purpose, and the courage to trust again, despite overwhelming reasons not to. When he found Scout, Shadow discovered what many of us know: our deepest healing comes when we focus on helping others. Whether you're grieving a lifetime partner, facing an empty nest, or navigating retirement's uncertain terrain, remember Shadow's resilience. Your wounds don't disqualify you from purpose. They uniquely qualify you to understand others' pain. Your greatest contribution may still lie ahead, not despite your suffering, but because of it. In the evening of life, we still have light to give.